Welcome to Two Giant Goofballs, a New York Giants podcast. Are you a goofball that loves Giants football? If so, sit back and relax as we talk about the team that both excites and frustrates us so much. And now, here are your goofball hosts, Drew and Rob.
Welcome, fellow goofballs, to Two Giant Goofballs, a New York Giants podcast. I am not Drew, but I'm running the show. I'm Rob, all solo today. Yes, we're going to break down the hard knocks of last night's episode 3. Can you guys believe it already? I can't. We got some more juicy news on some Barkley news. We got some more juicy news on Mr. McKinney, which wasn't too juicy. We went over, we broke down what the Giants' needs are through the draft and free agency. And we're going to break that all down to you. Drew, you got any comments? No? All right, cool. Since he's not here, let's dive right into it. First up, we got to talk about Barkley. What's up, soul brother? Popping right in. First comment of the day. How you doing, brother? But Mr. Barkley was the first guy that we got to talk about because he's the non-Giant of the hour that we've been talking about nonstop since free agency. Joe Schoen talks to Ed Barry, who clearly didn't want to give up his number in the conversation. He also had Schoen reminded that the agent left the test marks to come back at a number. We went through that thoroughly previously, and we went through it again last night's episode. We kind of put the ball in the agent's court and see how it was working from there. Schoen is then given a number of 3 years, $2.5 million with 25 guaranteed, and asked if he would does what wants Saquon to be a Giant. He pretty much did, your basic sales guy's tactic. He just want to go in there, negotiate. Like anytime you go buy a car, you're gonna go in there, lowball your car agent or your car salesman because he's gonna come back. Anytime you do sales, is kind of what you do. It's a little cat and mouse over here. Schoen then calls Mara to let him know of the conversation. He said the agent's response was, well, Schoen tells Mara that he got a text saying Chicago was driving the price up and Philly was out, which I found interesting because obviously that didn't happen. But also want to give another shout out to Soul Brother. Listen to us at work. Love it, my man. And then John Mayer responds to the text about going to Chicago. I'm going to have a tough time sleeping if Saquon goes to Philly. I'll tell you that. He's the most popular player we have by far, and he's not wrong. He was the face of the franchise since he was drafted. And he's across the Delaware playing for the wrong team in the wrong colors. Later, they say other teams were offering more than the Giants wanted to pay, which Drew and I have beat into nauseum. That is 100% true. Schoen calls up his agent and asks about the offer. He said it was north of the offer that the Giants have discussed with him earlier in the episode. The show then announced that the Eagles signed Barkley. Eagles gave him a 3-year, $37.5 million with 26 guaranteed, which just a couple mil north of where the Giants were. But Schoen made a plan, and he stuck with it. But Schoen also, this is the thing that a lot of people are talking about, that we never made an offer to Barkley or his agent or anything. But watching last night's episode, we kind of did. We just kind of put it out there. It wasn't like a paper. It's more of like a handshake, high five, stuff of the hands kind of deal. We did like more of a feel offer with $3 million, 36 and 25 guaranteed. And then Was that like an official offer? Like, I mean, you could sit there and like think about it, like, but not really. But if Barkley also wants to be a Giant, he would also been part of the Ring of Honor. He would have been in the Giants Hall of Fame. Like, he just would have been. I mean, granted, Philadelphia market is a good market, but it's not a New York market. There's a lot more face and a lot more advertisements you could be in this media market compared to Philadelphia. So at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, like, as much as the Giants got crushed about wanting Barkley to stay or want him to go, like, did we offer this and that? Like, you also have to ask from the other side around, like, did Barkley want to stay here? He said he did, but for an extra $1 million, he jumped ship. Like, the potential to make $1.5 million extra, which he definitely would have made up in advertisement money. There's no doubt in my mind. Anyone listening out there, what did you guys think about the Barkley segment? What did you think about the past 3 episodes about what we've talked about with Barkley? Drop a comment, let me know. And the next top free agent. Well, before we get into the next free agent here that we had to talk about, let's get into Deb's comment, who says, I think Barkley's nose was still bent from being franchised last year. He should have accepted the Giants' first offer. Oh, well. And you know what, Deb? You're not wrong. He would have been making more money. Granted, it wasn't the sweet deal you wanted because that's when the running back market really dropped, was last year. And that's when Barkley wanted to make his payday. And just like anyone out there, you're thinking you're going to get this big raise, and then push comes to shove. They don't get that big raise. You kind of get a little, and you feel like you got slapped on. Like, it's very easy to jump ship if that's what you're feeling. But the next guy that got paid, not by the Giants, was Mr. X himself, Xavier McKinney. They briefly touched about this, not as much as Barkley, but then again, no one has been talked about much as Barkley has since Hard Knocks has started. So they announced that the deal the Packers gave them, talking about how he was the second highest paid safety in the league. And you see Shane running his numbers, just fibbing around with his Dunkin' Donuts cup on the corner of his desk there. They show that Shane on the phone with someone talking about the deal as he's fibbing with those numbers. It seems the Giants were given a chance to match the deal based on pretty much that whole conversation Shane had with whoever he was talking to, but they declined to report anything about the deal or whatnot. The Packers gave him 4 years with $67 million, which was, I think they broke it down to $18.5 million, being the second highest paid safety in the league. Interesting, there was no mention of a free agent to replace him as in the draft, and it was planned all along. So going back to Barkley, we've talked about this Barkley situation ad nauseum for quite some time. And about the first episode where they talk about his replacement and who could replace him and who they think they could replace him down the road. And what did the Giants do? They replaced him pretty fast. And we'll talk about that down later in the episode. But when it came to X over here, there wasn't too much talking about it. Did they think they were going to re-sign him? Did they think they had an opportunity to maybe sign him for a lot less? Guys, let me know what you're thinking about that over there. But what they did do is go over their targets and needs. And they flat out said, what do they need on that offense? Dable came out and even said himself, offensive line. So they flat out said offensive line is the number one offensive need. They were competing with the Jets for the same players, which was interesting because at least if you're the player, you know where you're looking to shop for your new home in the East Rutherford, Hoboken area, if you will. They broke down some quarterbacks, and it was kind of interesting to look through and see who they're looking at the time. And you get kind of tell with the editing too, because Drew and I talked about this last week with the editing process. You see who they really shine around, and obviously we signed people after this editing process was going through. So their QB targets was Tyrod Taylor, but we all know what happened to him. Drew Lock, Sam Darnold, and Gardner Minshew. And it was nice to see him break down these players about what they could do, their age, and their cost and their effectiveness, because they know that this, backup quarterback is potentially going to be your number one until they know that DJ is 100% healthy. So obviously we all know what happened. We signed Drew Lock in the offseason. Everyone saw his social posts saying, "Hey, yeah, Big Blue, what do you guys do for your your logo thing over there? What do you guys do? What you're saying, Big Blue? Yeah, let's go with that, Big Blue." When they talk about the running back needs later in the episode, you can see them breaking down Saquon Barkley, obviously, Devin Singletary, and then DeAndre Swift. And obviously, we got Singletary. We know that part. Their offensive line targets were Luminor, Runyon Jr., Robert Hunt, and they tried to get all three of these guys, which shows you they're building out the trenches. Drew and I have talked about that ad nauseum. If you want to win a trench warfare, you need to build some strong trenches. And then, obviously, we've been talking about Brian Burns, which is the only defensive line that they've talked about, which they've also used as the backup of not signing McKinney. Like, hey, if we got a really good defensive line, you got Tibbs, you got Burns, and you got Sexy Dex putting all that pressure on the quarterback. How much do you actually need the second best or fourth best safety in the league back there? It gives your secondary a chance to give some breathing room, if you will, because the quarterback's going to be under pressure. Joe Schoen also sent Dable a text before free agency. Protect the QB. Go after the QB. Let's go. Talk about that trench warfare. Joe Schoen also seemed upset with how much players were getting. He reminded me of my grandfather as prices of everything was going up, and he didn't know that Social Security was going up too. He was just that guy that was like, hey, why is there inflation such a thing? Why is it going up so much? Like, it's modern NFL. These poor guys are getting paid. Like, it's crunch time. And just like he said, he wrote all these names on the whiteboard. They were trying to figure out who gets what. They put all this time in trying to get things done, but come, free agency, it's a free agency frenzy. And that's exactly what happened. So let's break down some of these players that we did get. John Runyon Jr. He's projected on this show to get $8 to $9 million per year. It was nice because they showed it right there on the Texan holding cards. Got to know when to hold them. Got to know when to fold them. Got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. The Jets offered him 2 years, $19 million with $8 million guaranteed. The Giants countered offer that with 3 years, $30 million, $17 guaranteed, which I'm the rocket scientist. One, we know that we signed this guy, and two, that's a lot more money to be making on a potentially better team. And they went aggressive because they wanted to get away from that whole Green Bay aspect of if A.A. Ron and him rekindle. They've also they hammered it into all our brains out there that this guy, 3 years, has played for Green Bay and has not missed a single game. It was nonstop talked about, which, you know what? As a Giants fan, we should be happy to hear something like that because all we get are offensive line players. They're all getting hurt. We're all getting, like, how many times did we switch up that line? I think 4 different times we had a completely different line, at least, up to halfway through the season, and then just kept varying. So, yeah, consistency. Like, will give better play. And they also broke down he's either going to be a right tackle or a left guard. That was their idea. Which, Drew, remind me if I'm wrong, but we've talked about this. Yeah, that's right, Rob. Cool, thanks, Drew. Glad to hear that, guys. Let me know what you think about Runyon Jr. in the comments. Up next, Mr. Giants fan himself, Dareen Limanor, who was projected on the show originally at around a $3 to $5 million cap hit. And then once this line and this frenzy start moving around, what happened? You had to double down. It went up to $5 to $6 million to pay this guy. Arizona really liked this guy. They talked about that because he was pretty much the best guy that was in free agency. Saints just offered him a 3-year deal to get it done, but it came out that his agent and him only wanted a 2-year deal, which in hindsight is a smart move because if you play well those 2 years, guess what? You're going to get a big payday towards the end. Some said that we get our starting right tackle, starting right guard. This was after Runyon was already signed. Interesting. They went up to $7 million to get this deal done. So once again, let's recap. We initially thought it was going to be $3 to $5 million. Then we said, oh, it's going to be $5 to $6 million, and we paid $7 million. Luminor wanted his first year to be higher than the second year, and the Giants didn't want to guarantee him anything for the next year. Done deal. Up next, we have Robert Hurt. On the show, we projected him at $13 to $15 million per year. They thought about teaming him with Andrew Thomas and JMS to make a nice trio for the next few years. It was said once they upped the offer for Runyon that Hunt wasn't an option any longer. They don't want to see why the Giants could easily create a cap space issue here. They could have cleared up some more room. We've actually kind of knew about this after the McKinney and the Barkley thing, obviously. So he signed for 5 years, $100 million with the Panthers. So we're still hunting for Hunt. Or not. Anyway, let's go into the running back situation here. Devin Singletary. Beginning the show, he was offered a $5 million. He was projected at $5 million per year. Dable asked if he is okay with Singletary and quickly said yes. My man did not hesitate. He was like, "Would you like an extra side of range with them wings?" He said, "Yes," real fast. They announced after losing Saquon and McKinney that Singletary was in 3 years, $16.5 million, which is in that ballpark figure of that $5 million. It's 5.5 a year instead. Up next, we have Deontay Swift. Obviously didn't get him, but we projected him at the beginning of the show at $6 million per year. He got from the Bears $24 million over the next 3 years. So right there where we thought he was going to go. Deb also chimed in over here that she's very happy with the Lumador and Runyon Jr. pickup. I am too, because Drew and I talked about these guys prior to this episode many times. They're not the best guys out there, but they're damn good upgrade from what we've had for the past near decade. So I'm loving this fact. Deb also came in and said, I think we'll see a big difference with the new O-line coach. And I talked about that a lot. So did Drew, but I think Drew actually took a step back because I've talked about how we've had a terrible offensive line for X amount of years. We had the same offensive line coach, and all this draft capital that we've spent in that line, we spent more than any other team, and we got nowhere out of it. We ruined players. We have players that play terrible for us, and we went to other teams that had a pretty good career. So you can start pointing your fingers somewhere. It may not have been the players. It's probably the coaching staff because we're not coaching our players up correctly. So I think the Giants made a lot of good coaching moves this year. So I'm right on board with you, Deb. All right, let's talk about some backup QBs, possibly starters as the year comes in, depending on DJ's health. Up first is Tyrod Taylor. Top backup QB target. Obviously, spent the past 2 years with us. Played well when he had to. Also got concussed with us when we didn't want him to, but that's besides the point. He was projected at the beginning of the show at $7 million a year. Dable says that he would have the same QB as last year and not as a positive thing. Shane responded, for now, we'll need to see what happens. He left the Jets 2 years, $12 million, which is less than the Giants expected to pay for him. So that's interesting as well. The Tyrod went out. He did not like the new coaching staffs. Did he not like Dable? Did he not like the organization? But he also kind of just changed colors in different sides of the stadium where he changes into those colors. Joe Schoen talked with Merritt, and it seemed very uncomfortable for with the number of injuries in his history, which Giants fans, how many times did he get hurt while he was playing for us as a backup, nonetheless? He then mentioned Flacco and Drew Lock, saying that we could pay them less, and they've come in and played pretty well. They broke it down as Flacco, older guy, went to the Browns, had a good, offensive line, and had a good end of his career. Most likely. He's probably going to get paid somewhere else. And then he went into Drew Lock. They pivoted to him as soon as Tyrod signed with the Jets. Their pitch to him was how Trubisky went over to Buffalo, where guess who was there at the time? Joe Schoen and D-Ball. Good old Dibs. Yeah. He got paid after being over in Buffalo, going over to Pittsburgh. Tyrod got a raise going to the Jets. And, of course, Danny Dimes is uncertainty health-wise. They felt like Seattle wanted him back. And they also mentioned how a lot of that Gino went over there, did better, and whatnot. So we wound up getting locked for $5 million for 1 year. So making that improvement on him. They also talked about Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew is projected anywhere between $10 to $20 million to be a backup quarterback in this league. He got 2 years, $25 million to go play with the Raiders, most likely starting with the Raiders. Sam Darnold was the next guy here, who they projected to be at $4 million, and he wound up getting 1 year, $10 million from the Vikings. That was a necessity from the Vikings, but anywhere else he would have went, they probably would have been in that $4 to $5 million ballpark, and he probably would have been back up anywhere else. I mean, he's paid to be back up behind, their nice draft pick over there in Minnesota, but $10 million for your backup, that gives you clarity. If JJ can't make it out, you got someone else that you could possibly maybe put in who hasn't really played all that great everywhere he went. But hey, he was a Jet. Let's talk about everyone's favorite topic of positivity the Giants picked up this year, and that's Brian Burns. They talked about his young age and strong character a lot. And that's not just on this episode. ESPN and everyone else around has talked about how great he is as a person on the field, off the field. Good old Spidey. They called him still ascending. I mean, he was also mentioned to be the top 10 edge, but yeah, we'll talk about that later. Mentioned he can help Kayvon and Sexy Dex. Dable asked how his sack production was, and it was said he had more sacks than Josh Allen, Rashad Gary, and Mosette Sweat. All these guys were paid, all from the same draft. Shane said the backup plan was to find a rush in the draft if they could not get Burns done. They didn't talk about any other back and forth on extensions, which was agreed before the trade was. Panthers originally wanted they wanted the better second round pick, but the Giants said that's all they get. Joe put his foot down, especially when it came to that 7th round pick. When Dan Morgan called him, Shane joked, let it ring. Morgan tried to get another 7th round pick. And now that you're picking up your most valuable guys in the 7th round, but yeah, Shane just immediately come back because, come on, man, I need players too. And didn't budge, stayed still, and yeah, Morgan caved. Shane budged on giving pick 39 and 140, along with a 5th round next year, the first 5th round. And then the Panthers would give up pick 165 along with the rights to burn, which, because of this way his franchise was, we take on the money and they get compensation. So that's the breakdown of the players that we went through in this free agency here thus far today. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, or let's talk about the Mara in the room, because Drew and I talked offline about this before. He had some technical difficulties and some issues that he had to take care of. But we talked about Mara quite a bit beforehand. We talked about it before last night, but we talked about Mara last night and today. Before we dive into Mara real fast, let's see what Deb is saying over here. I'm surprised the Panthers went for that. I think Burns was a steal. And you know what, Deb? You're 100% right. I don't know if Shane honeydicked Morgan into giving that pickup like that, or I don't know. I don't know if they're just trying to rebuild over there, rebuild more, I guess, down in Carolina, but he gave up what's projected to be the top 10 edge this year for next to nothing. We just got to pay the guy. And it's not like Carolina is paying many players this year. So they have the room to pay this man. But listen, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Take it and let's ride. In the words of Russell Wilson. All right, back to John Mara. I mean, we talked about it last season. Like, was he meddling a little bit with DJ's contract? Was he meddling a little bit with Barkley prior? Like, he seems to be the cringe guy in the room, and no one really says too much to him. Like, Shane does stand up to him and say, like, hey, this is what we got to do. But at the same time, that's a guy signing your paycheck. So you're not going to go like, hey, man, The door's over there. Why don't you take a step back? You got to listen to this guy out, but he almost seems like he could be a little too much in there, whispering on what to do. Like, do we pay Barkley? Do we pay all these players that we want to keep? Just like extra, Shaq. We keep those two guys. Guess what? We don't have a new offensive line. So when you're trying to rebuild the team, as much as it sucks, you got to let go of some good players. This way you can rebuild all the other positions. Because what's good is if your secondary is one of the best, but everyone's running 200 yards on you every single game, what does it matter if we have the fourth best safety? If all we can do is run the ball, if we're paying a quarterback $40 million a year to hand the ball off, not even pass the ball, hand the ball off, why are we doing that? We could have got Sam Darnold to do that. We would have paid, $10 million for that. So as much as these moves hurt, this is a necessity to rebuild these teams. So you got to know when to cut the ties. Should he be more concerned about the product on the field? Which I also think he should think about getting more than just a medium free Coke out. But yeah, he should be. There should be other concerns besides getting in there. You paid Joe Schoen to do this, and you're trusting Dable to lead your team in order to this. Like, let the guys do their job. This is why you pay these guys. So coming up next week, Shane asked the room if they could see enough of Daniels that they would trade up for him, and Dable quickly said, I would. I don't know how much of that was edited or how much it was a live shot action, but Dable looked up like he was in the middle of Buffalo Wild Wings, and that big old order of 3 dozen wings came flying his way. I'm here. Shane said, if we don't get a QB here, we roll with DJ, and let's try to get him a weapon, which, like neighbors, that's what we got to say there. So, let's quickly get into Deb's comments. I pulled the Drew and did not pay the bills, so we'll get to that in a moment. Drew says, Merritt let it be known that he wanted what he wanted, but in the end, he still left up to Shane. Some owners out of there would have said, I want Barkley. I don't care what it takes, period. And yeah, look at Panthers. We were just talking about him, the Panthers just before, but since what's his face, tech billionaire took it over, he just says, I want this, I want that, and makes too fast of trades that makes too much moving on. Look at Dallas. Jerry Jones meddles way too much with what's going on down there, and sometimes it works out, usually doesn't. I mean, Dallas is 12-5 for the past 3 years. Can't win a playoff game. Look at Carolina. They're the worst team in football for how many years now? So they made the tough calls. They did the right things, but it hurt some feelings, but they did the right thing. But before we go over here, let's pay some bills.
Enjoying the show? Looking for more goofball action? Consider a membership at buymeacoffee.com/2giantgoofballs. Memberships start at just $5 and give you additional goofball access. One-time support payments also available starting at just $3. buymeacoffee.com/2giantgoofballs.
All right. Well, guys, that wraps up the show, unless you guys got any more comments out there. But as always, we are live on YouTube, Twitter. Well, not so much Twitter anymore. You got to pay for that. So it'll be up on Twitter later on after it's not live anymore. But we're also on Instagram. We'll get on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We're also on someone's LinkedIn page who's not here. So we're just going to go all around Drew's LinkedIn page. And as always, the next morning, 5 o'clock a.m., you can find us on all your favorite audio podcasts, whether it be Spotify, Apple, whether it be iHeartRadio, whether it be Dozer Gozer, whatever the kids are listening to these days. And if we're not on that audio platform, you guys are probably listening to the wrong stuff out there. I don't know what you listen to. But that being said, everyone out there listening, have yourself a good night. We'll be back on tomorrow at normal standard time. Drew should be back on. We'll be at 9 p.m. We're always on on Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, 9 p.m. live. We try not to miss an episode for you guys. Sorry that I was late tonight. But as always, fans, go J-Man! J-Man! J-Man!
Thanks for listening to Two Giant Goofballs, a New York Giants podcast. We appreciate your support.
Thanks so much.
Please, I'm begging you.